Hello everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to construct the lined gusset on our Vega pattern. So here I have the front bodice piece, I have my main gusset, and I have my lining gusset. On the front bodice piece, I've marked my center crotch, and on the gussets, I've marked my center front and my center back. On the gussets, you want to make sure that you follow the front and back as labeled on the pattern piece because the front is different from the back. So with my center front of my bodice piece, I am going to place my center front of my gusset on top, matching the two center points, and I am going to pin this in place. While you can use clips, I do recommend using pins as they do keep things in place a bit better. After that's pinned, I'm going to flip this over so that the wrong side of my bodice fabric is facing up, and I'm going to put the right side of my gusset piece on top, once again matching up that center point of the front gusset to the crotch. And I'm going to pin that in place using the same pin. So what I have here now is kind of a sandwich. I have the main gusset, I have my front bodice piece, and then I have the lining gusset sandwiched in between. Then, lifting one side of the leg, I am going to take this edge of the gusset lining and I am going to match it up to the edge of the bottom of the leg. I then am going to grab also the main gusset edge and also match it up to the bottom edge of the front bodice leg. And I am going to pin that in place. So you can see that I now have the gusset piece, the bodice piece, and the lining gusset, the gusset lining piece. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So once again, take the edge, match it up to the bottom of the leg. And then I'm going to take the main gusset piece and I'm going to pin that in place there. So once again, I now have a sandwich. So this is the main gusset front, this is the crotch of the front bodice piece, and then this is the lining the lining gusset. Now I want to slightly stretch the main and lining gusset so that it meets the leg of the front bodice piece. You can see I can stretch that like that, and all of my edges are aligned, and I'm going to pin in the center. And then on both sides. And repeat on the other side. All right, now that that's pinned, the first thing we're going to do is baste in place this center point here. And the reason we want to do that is because of the crotch being cut the way it is and the gusset being cut the way it is. If you go straight into sewing this from edge to edge, this can slip in the center. So I always you can either baste or you can go ahead and use a straight stretch stitch on your sewing machine and sew about 1 to 2 inches on both sides of the center point. All right, so I've gone ahead and basted in just along this top edge here. And before I sew the whole edge, I just want to double check that I have indeed caught all of my layers in the basting stitch, and you can see that I have. So for this one, I've used a 1/4 inch basting stitch just along this top edge here. I'm now with a stretch stitch, or you can use a serger, going to go ahead and sew all along this top edge here. All right, I've gone ahead and serged that seam. If you've used a sewing machine with a stretch stitch, you want to go ahead and trim the seam allowance and clip the curves here. So when I turn this right side out, you can see I now have my front piece, my gusset piece, and my lining, and you'll see that the lining is covering that seam allowance. So there's no need to top stitch that seam allowance if you don't want to. So I'm then going to take my back bodice piece, and I've gone ahead and once again found the center back of the crotch. And I already, again, previously marked the center back of my gusset piece here. So I'm going to take my front piece, and I have separated the front gusset from everything else. So all I want to be holding is the front gusset main, not the lining. And similar to like we did before, I'm going to place just the center of the gusset main on top of my center back crotch and pin that in place there. I'm now going to take the gusset and lining and kind of pull them out of the way. Just push them down like this. I'm going to take the front bodice that's already attached to the gusset, and I'm going to put it to the right. And I'm going to take the back bodice and I'm going to put it to the left. So what I have left is basically the gusset in the center and the front and back to the sides. We're doing a burrito roll of sorts. What we're going to do now is I'm going to take the right side of the gusset and I'm going to wrap it around so that it meets the same center point that we just pinned. And I'm going to pin that there. So again, what we've done is we've basically made a burrito roll with the bodice pieces along the sides and the gusset wrapped around. So the right side of my gusset lining and the right side of my gusset main will be touching each other. And right now they're only pinned at that central point, that center point there. So I'm going to do a similar thing that I did for the front pieces. So this here, I'm going to take this, if we look at it this way, this is the edge of the gusset main back. I am going to match it up with the bottom of the leg of the back bodice, and then the gusset lining edge, and I'm also going to line that up with the leg and the front gusset. And I am going to pin that into place. And again, once again, I like using pins for this step instead of clips. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make sure that all of my bodice pieces are completely out of the way. So this is lining. This is the bottom of the other leg of the back bodice. And then this is the gusset main edges. And pin. You're then once again, just like you did on the front, going to stretch the gusset to meet the leg. And you're just going to lightly stretch it. It shouldn't take too much stretching. And we're going to pin it at the center here. And then along both sides. And then repeat with the other side. And you once again have a burrito or gusset sandwich. So you have the gusset lining. These are the legs of the back of the bodice, crotch, and then the gusset main. And this is the seam we sewed before. And then these are your bodice pieces out at the side. So I'm going to, once again, baste just 1 to 2 inches of both sides of this center point. Now that I've basted that, I'm just going to check in the seam allowance here, make sure I have fully gotten all of my pieces in the seam allowance. So yep, we're good with that. Now I'm going to use a stretch stitch or serger and serge along or sew along this edge here. Make sure you keep your bodice pieces out of the way. You don't want them to get serged or sewn into this seam line here. All right, that's serged on mine. If you did sew with a stretch stitch on a regular sewing machine, you're going to want to make sure you clip your seam allowances, trim your seam allowances, and clip your curves here. Now I turn it right side out, and all I do to do that is pull this through and continue pulling it through. And there you have it, a fully lined and enclosed gusset. That was the front, and that is the back. So from here, you just follow the next steps for whatever option you are doing. And you do want to give this a good press. So before you do the next steps, definitely do press this seam here, both on both sides. And that's how you do the lined gusset.